So we've only got about a week and a half before Detroiters will go to the polls to elect a new mayor, elect a number of new members of city council, and probably get to decide on some major charter revisions. For all of that important stuff being at stake, you would think there would be more buzz about all of this in the city, but because I think we don't have the number of glitzy candidates that we normally do, this is kind of flying under the radar, and it's really hard to make heads or tails out of what's going to happen.
It is, and there's that strange element of the charter. The absentee ballots went out, and people are voting on Prop P, even though the Supreme Court is still weighing whether it should be on the ballot or not. And so we're not quite sure what happens if the charter, to those votes that are cast, what happens if it's taken off the ballot. I mean, there's still a lot of questions.
I mean, so if the court says this can't be on the ballot, then all of those votes that are being cast now, absentee, don't count because it won't be a question. Let's talk about the danger of that message in a city like Detroit, where people are already voting, are already questioning the integrity of the vote, already accusing Detroiters of cheating. You have a lot of Detroiters who are still raw about that, still thinking that people want to take the vote away from them. Imagine then if in the very next election, if you cast a ballot and it literally doesn't count. I mean, this is not a really great way to run a democracy.
I don't know how you communicate it. I think the only thing worse is that if the charter passes and we have to live under it in the city of Detroit, they've sort of forgot the mission of a charter. A charter is supposed to be an operating blueprint. It's not supposed to be a point-by-point direction for how you run the city. I mean, you've got to give an opportunity for the elected officials to administrate.
I mean, it's an example of some overreach. There's no question. There are some things that they're talking about doing there that I believe you cannot do in the charter, and that's why it ended up in court in the first place. But at the same time, I want to give a nod to the people who did this work. The work that they put in. A lot of people spent a lot of their time. They brought a lot of energy and imagination to this process. And a lot of the ideas they came up with are things we ought to be talking about in the city of Detroit and things that we ought to be working toward. The charter is probably not the right vehicle for those things. The legislative table is, right? This is where city council, if it were more a foil, for instance, to mayoral power, which it has not been, if it were more creative on its own in terms of what it wanted the city to look like and what it was willing to take initiative to do, we could be talking about those things in the right forum in Detroit and voting to do them. We have a real problem with the way that we deal with the water system in this city. You have all kinds of people who are always on the verge of not having water. That doesn't make any sense.
But we have vehicles for addressing it now. We didn't need to change the charter. In fact, I thought this whole process was unnecessary, that there was nothing so broke about the 2012 charter that we needed to come back and change it. But the other races, I mean, I thought they would be, and there may be a lot more buzz around the council races since there are 4 open seats. You got a lot of candidates running, some familiar names, but they don't seem to have a whole lot of those familiar faces you might expect clamoring for these jobs.
You don't have a lot of familiar faces in some of the districts. In some others, though, you're seeing names crop up who have, I think, become part of the political fabric of the city through the district process. People who are doing work in those districts, people who are working with community groups and neighborhoods in those districts are now saying, hey, I'd like to represent this district. It's going to take a while for us to know who those kind of people are, because the city's a big place. Each of these districts has its own kind of life. At the same time, you've got folks like Fred Durhall, who is in the legislature, decided he's going to take a shot because he's like everybody else. You got Coleman Young, who also got term limited out of the legislature, who's running at large and has attracted the endorsement of both newspapers in town, neither of whom didn't love him when he ran for mayor.
What I was thinking, Steve, as I looked at the names on the ballot, looking for the future of Detroit, looking for those future leaders who might someday sit in the mayor's office, because I doubt Duggan's going to run for another term after this. I assume he's going to win this election. I don't see a serious challenge to him here. But where's the future on this list?
It could be in some of these council races. If Coleman Young can win an at-large council seat in 4 or 8 years, it puts him in a position, if he does a good job and raises his name recognition and define, he's got this extra challenge, of course, of defining himself separate from his namesake, carving out an actual profile for himself. If he does that, he would be a very formidable candidate for mayor. I'm always counseling people, we got to be more patient around here. We only elected this first council by district group in 2013. It's only 8 years ago. That they haven't had enough time to figure out how it works and then to define themselves in a way that you'd see people really taking a huge shot at mayor. I think the story in the city still is Duggan and how powerful he is, how powerful he will be in this third term. I expect him to get north of 60% of the vote on the primary day. He could be north of 70 in November, and he will have $800 million of federal money to spend. Think of that third term. Think of any politician entering their third term with that kind of momentum.
If he's smart, he'll spend some of that money to keep water out of people's basements, because I think that's an issue people are as angry about